ALC crew, welcome to week 9. Here's what's going on this week. Your American Dream statements, backward design, the CW essay, 1920s historical context, chapter guide, journal entries 1 and 2, and this week's to-do. So let's get started. Your American Dream statements were as insightful as they were honest, and they go a long way to set up some of the difficult yet rewarding discussions that we'll have during our upcoming novel study. Here's what some of your peers had to say.
Selma B. wrote, "Everyone has their own vision of what the American dream means to them. To me, the American dream is really just being happy, enjoying the life that I live, and accepting what I have." Haley H. wrote, "The American dream is about your happiness, happy with the family you have, the money you have, and the life you have." Ashley T. wrote, "As a female, I won't get the same American dream as a male. I will be looked down upon because I'm not as good or not as strong as male. Even though females are supposed to be treated equally to males, we don't get treated the same way. We get looked down on, or we hear comments like, 'You're not as strong,' or 'This is a job for a male.' I will still get my American dream. It just will be different." Kylie H. wrote, "The American dream can be difficult, but it's worth it, especially if you're moving to America from another country. The American dream could be easier if you were born and raised in the US your whole life. As long as you work hard and try to reach that goal, the American dream should happen." Malik A. wrote, "My understanding of the American dream is that it is something everyone should be proud to know and look up to. It should drive you to work harder and do your best." Sarah C. wrote, "Everyone has their own definition of the American dream. Some people are able to live up to that American dream, but the reality is that not everyone can. What the American dream means to me is being able to live happily in a place where you call home and feel safe, enjoying the time you spend with your family and friends."
Now, as we push further into this question of what is the American dream, we'll begin planning to achieve our end goal. The capstone assessment for this American Dream unit is the CEW essay, through which we'll develop a clear, well-supported, and cogent argument that critically responds to the following. What does The Great Gatsby say about the American dream, about race, and about social class? And what does this all mean to you? Why am I sharing this prompt with you now? For the simple reason that knowing what's to come will enable us to use this prompt as a roadmap with which to read this text and apply it to our lives right now. So let's actually break this essay apart now. American dream, race, and social class. Think of these three concepts as a set of 3 different lenses. The American dream. What is it? What do different people have to do to achieve it? Is it equally accessible by everyone? Race. How is the issue of race addressed in this story? How does this story illustrate the racial construct of American society? What do different characters' views say about race in America? And social class. How are people divided by it? How is this further emphasized by geography in this novel? And what happens when someone tries to transcend the social class they were born into? So now that we've established the direction that we're headed, let's get the lay of the land as far as context. What is happening in America when this story takes place? Now, I'm no historian nor a 1920s expert, but I know it's important as a reader to have some context for what is happening in the world of our story. It just makes more sense like that. So I spent a little time on Khan Academy to learn a little bit more about what it was like to be alive during the 1920s. For a link to this source on Khan Academy, head over to Canvas Week 9. Here's what I learned. The 1920s, or the Roaring Twenties, was a time period marked by progress, inequalities, dreams, and bitter realities. For the first time in American history, the majority of people lived in cities rather than rural areas. Why? Because that's where all the jobs were. You see, industry was booming, especially in the North, so much so that immigrants came from all over the world to seek new opportunities. 500,000 African Americans migrated north during what was called the Great Migration. Most jobs in cities were industrial and therefore came with a certain degree of job-related risk. Women benefited from new employment opportunities outside of the traditional construct of home-related work. However, many of the jobs available to white women were not available to women of color. Following World War I, many people now had gainful employment and therefore greater financial means. So what did most people do? They bought stuff. Appliances, home goods, modern conveniences. They spent money on recreation. Henry Ford developed the assembly line, making cars so affordable that many more people could have one. Advertising and commercialization became a widespread phenomenon. Conservative-minded people fostered the advent of prohibition, which made consumption of alcohol illegal. But people found ways of engaging in drinking anyway by frequenting hidden establishments known as speakeasies. Eventually, the restrictions of prohibition led directly to a spike in organized crime, specifically mob activity. Think Al Capone. The 1920s was a popular time for sports, particularly boxing. The early part of the 20th century saw a prominent racial divide. White Protestant groups viewed other European immigrants, those from other parts of the world, and African American people already within the United States as beneath them. The KKK, a white supremacist organization, grew prominently during this time period as the American caste system, built hundreds of years before, fomented inequalities within the fabric of American society. How? Well, for example, there was the Emergency Quota Act of 1921 and the Immigration Restriction Act of 1924. These were basically federal policies that favored immigrants from Northern and Western Europe while limiting those from other areas of the world. So why is all this important? In the 1920s, there was an emphatic push to consume material things and reach for the American dream, while at the same time, deep-rooted American attitudes and policies glued people's hands and feet to a ladderwork of classifications: immigrant status, racial identity, social class, gender, all that dictated who had access to the American dream and who did not. Enter The Great Gatsby. Now, to help you along as you read this novel, I'd like to provide you with some guiding questions and some clarifications to help you have a smooth read from chapter to chapter. So we'll begin with some clarification. We begin the story seeing a glimpse of America through the perspective of Nick Carraway, a young Yale graduate who fought in World War I and is from an established upper-class family. Nick shares a bit about his family and some advice that his father once told him: not to judge people. Then the story gets moving as Nick tells the reader that he's recently moved from the Midwest to the East Coast and is on his way to his cousin Daisy's for dinner. So now it's your turn. Consider the following questions as you work through chapter 1 and 2. 1. How can we describe Nick Carraway? 2. Why did he move out east? 3. Why does Fitzgerald spend so much time describing East and West Egg? 4. What book is Tom reading? What philosophy does he share with Nick? And what does this tell us about Tom? 5. According to Jordan, who calls Tom on the phone during dinner? 6. Describe the image we are left with at the end of chapter 1. Okay, another clarification. We're introduced to the sociogeographic layout of Long Island. That's where this story takes place. There's East Egg and West Egg. Why are they called eggs? Probably because of their shape. But what's important here is that East Egg is where the established upper class resides. These are people who have not only inherited wealth through many generations, but exist in the topmost rung of the social ladder. Across the bay is West Egg, an area occupied by people who have recently acquired their fortune and tend to over-embellish their homes to prove their worth. East Egg folks are very critical of West Egg folks. Then we move into chapter 2, where we encounter the Valley of Ashes. This third sociogeographical area contrasts the previous two in extreme fashion. Fitzgerald describes it as a certain desolate area of land. This is a Valley of Ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills, and grotesque gardens where ashes take the form of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally with the transcendent effort of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. Occasionally a line of gray cars crawls along an invisible track, gives out a ghastly creak, and comes to rest. And immediately the ash-gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud, which screens their obscure operations from your sight. So let's continue with the guided questions. 7. What does the Valley of Ashes represent? 8. What are the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg literally and symbolically? 9. Why does Tom go to the Valley of Ashes? And what does this tell us about him? And 10. What does the party at the end of chapter 2 reveal about Tom and Myrtle? Now, as we move through this novel study, we'll keep an ongoing journal as we read, answering questions of varied difficulty to track comprehension and interpretation. Each journal entry should consist of one thoroughly developed paragraph that accomplishes the following. 1. Addresses the prompt. 2. Includes your opinion. 3. Integrates a quote. And 4. Provides elaboration. Your journal entries will be scored as follows. An entry that incorporates all 4 requirements will earn a score of 10 points. An entry that incorporates 3 of the 4 requirements will earn a score of 8 points. 2 of the 4 requirements, a score of 6 points. And 1 or fewer will earn a score ranging from 0 to 4 points. Here are our first 2 journal prompts. Chapter 1. What does Chapter 1 say about social class? To answer this question, mention some of the details Fitzgerald uses to illustrate class dynamics. Consider the geosocial layout of East and West Egg, the clothes the characters wear, and some of the commentary made by each character. Chapter 2. During Chapter 2, Tom visits Wilson's garage, where we observe a scene involving Tom, Myrtle, and Wilson. Closely read the part describing the interactions between each of these characters. How does each character's understanding of their own social class influence their behavior and actions? I'm looking forward to reading all of your responses. So here's the to-do for this week. 1. Journal entries 1 and 2. That's 2 journal entries. As with every other assignment, these assignments will be due on the last day of the school week, Friday, October 16th by 11:59 p.m. Well, that's it for this one, ALC crew. We'll see you in virtual class. In the meantime, stay safe, stay focused, and stay connected.